Tertium Organum by P.D. Ouspensky, and this is a continuation of Chapter 6. Let us imagine that a wheel, with the spokes painted different colors, is rotating through the plane upon which the plane being lives. To such a being, all the motion of the wheel will appear as a variation of the color of the line of intersection of the wheel and the plane. The plane being will call this variation of the color of the line a phenomenon, and observing these phenomena, he will notice in them a certain succession. He will know that the black line is followed by the white one, the white by the blue by the red, and so on. If simultaneously with the appearance of the white line some other phenomenon occurs, say the ringing of a bell, the two-dimensional being will say that the white line is the cause of that ringing. The change of the color of the lines, in the opinion of the two-dimensional being, will depend on causes lying right in his plane. Any presupposition of the possibility of the existence of causes lying outside of the plane he will characterize as fantastic and entirely unscientific. It will seem so to him because he will never be in a position to represent the wheel to himself, i.e. the parts of the wheel on both sides of the plane. After a rough study of the color of the lines, and knowing the order of their sequence, the plane being, perceiving one of them, say the blue one, will think that the black and the white ones have already passed, i.e. disappeared, ceased to exist, gone into the past, and that those lines which have not yet appeared, the yellow, the green, and so on, and the new white and black ones still to come, do not yet exist, but lie in the future. Therefore, though not conceiving the form of his universe, and regarding it as infinite in all directions, the plane being will nevertheless involuntarily think of the past as situated somewhere at one side of all, and the future as somewhere at the other side of this totality. In such manner will the plane being conceive of the idea of time. We see that this idea arises because the two-dimensional being senses only 2 out of 3 dimensions of space. The third dimension he senses only after its effect become manifest upon the plane, and therefore he regards it as something different from the first 2 dimensions of space, calling it time. Now, let us imagine that through the plane upon which the two-dimensional being lives, 2 wheels with multicolored spokes are rotating in opposite directions. The spokes of one wheel come from above and go below. The spokes of the other come from below and go above. The plane being will never notice it. He will never notice that where for one line which he sees there lies the past, and for another line there lies the future. This thought will never even come into his head, because he will conceive of the past and the future very confusedly, regarding them as concepts, not as actual facts. But at the same time he will firmly be convinced that the past goes on in one direction and the future in another. Therefore it will seem to him a wild absurdity that on one side something past and something future can lie together, and on the other side, and also beside these two, something future and something past. To the plane being, the idea that some phenomena come whence others go, and vice versa, will seem equally absurd. He will tenaciously think that the future is that wherefrom everything comes, and the past is that whereto everything goes, and wherefrom nothing returns. He will be totally unable to understand that events may arise from the past, just as they do from the future. Thus we see that the plane being, will regard the changes of color of the lines lying on the plane very naively. The appearance of different spokes he will regard as the change of color from one and the same line, and the repeated appearance of the same colored spoke he will regard every time as a new appearance of a given color. But nevertheless, having noticed periodically in the change of the color of the lines upon the surface, having remembered the order of their appearance, and having learned to define the time of the appearance of certain spokes in relation to some other more constant phenomena, the plane being will be in a position to foretell the change of the line from one color to another. Thereupon he will say that he has studied this phenomena and he can apply to it the mathematical method, can calculate it. If we ourselves enter the world of plane beings, then its inhabitants will sense the lines limiting the section of our bodies. Okay, let me just say, when he says inhabitants, he's not saying inhabitants, he says inhabit ants, A-N-T-S. Okay, so I'm going to read that sentence again with that in mind. If we ourselves enter the world of plane beings, then its inhabitants will sense the lines limiting the sections of our bodies. These sections will be for them living beings. They will not know whence they appear, why they alter, or whither they disappear in such a miraculous manner. So also the sections of our inanimate but moving objects will seem independent living beings. If the consciousness of a plane being should suspect our existence and should come into some sort of communion with our consciousness, then to him we would appear as higher, omniscient, possibly omnipotent, but above all, incomprehensible beings of a quite inconceivable category. We would see his world just as it is, and not as it seems to him. We would see the past and the future, could foretell, direct, and even create events. We would know the very substance of things, could know what matter is, what motion is. And here he says, matter, in brackets, the straight line, motion, in brackets, the broken line, the curve, the angle. So let me read that sentence again. We could know the very substance of things. We could know what matter, the straight line, is, what motion, the broken line, is. We could see an angle and we could see a center. All this would give us an enormous advantage over the two-dimensional being. In all the phenomena of the world of the two-dimensional being, we could see considerably more than he sees, or could see quite other things than he. And we could tell him very much that was new, amazing, and unexpected about the phenomena of his world, provided indeed that he could hear us and understand us. First of all, we could tell him that what he regards as phenomena, angles and curves, for instance, are properties of higher figures that Other phenomena of his world are not phenomena, but only parts or sections of phenomena. And what he calls solids are only sections of solids, and many things besides. We would be able to tell him on both sides of his plane, i.e., of his space or ether, on both sides of his plane lies infinite space. We would be able to tell him that on both sides of his plane lies infinite space, which the plane being calls time, and that in this space lie the causes of all his phenomena, and the phenomena themselves, the past as well as the future ones. Moreover, we might add that phenomena themselves are not something happening and then ceasing to be, but combinations of properties of higher solids. But we should experience considerable difficulty in explaining anything to the plane being, and it would be very difficult for him to understand us. First of all, it would be difficult because he would not have the concepts corresponding to our concepts. He would lack necessary words. For instance, section. This would be for him a quite new and inconceivable word. Then angle, again, an inconceivable word. Center, still more inconceivable. And third, perpendicular, something incomprehensible, lying outside of his geometry. The fallacy of his conception of time would be the most difficult thing for the plane being to understand. He could never understand that that which has passed and that which is to be are existing simultaneously on the lines perpendicular to his plane. And he could never conceive the idea that the past is identical with the future, because phenomena come from both sides and go in both directions. But the most difficult thing for the plane being would be to conceive the idea that time includes in itself two ideas, the idea of space and the idea of motion upon this space. We have shown what the two-dimensional being living on the plane calls motion has for us quite a different aspect. In his book, The Fourth Dimension, under the heading, The First Chapter in the History of Force Space, Hinton writes, quote, Parmenides, I don't know how to pronounce this word. I'll spell it for you. Parmenides, Parmenides, and the Asiatic thinkers with whom he is in close affinity propound a theory of existence which is in close accord with the conception of the possible relation between a higher and lower dimensional space. It is one which in all ages has had a strong attraction for pure intellect and is the natural mode of thought for those who refrain from projecting their own volition into nature under the guise of causality. According to Parmenides of the school of Elea, E-L-E-A, the all is one, unmoving and unchanging, the permanent amid the transient, that foothold for thought, that solid ground for feeling, on the discovery on which depends all our life, is no phantom. It is the image amidst deception of true being, the eternal, the unmoved, the one. Thus says Parmenides. But how is it possible to explain the shifting scene, these mutations of things? Illusion, answers Parmenides. Disguising between truth and error, he tells of the true doctrine of the one, the false opinion of a changing world. He is no less memorable for the manner of his advocacy than for the cause he advocates. Can the mind conceive a more delightful intellectual picture than that of Parmenides, pointing to the one, the true, the unchanging, and yet, on the other hand, ready to discuss the manner of false opinion? In support of the true opinion, he proceeded by the negative way of showing the self-contradictions in the ideas of change and motion. To express his doctrine in the ponderous modern way, we must make the statement that motion is phenomenal, not real. Let us represent his doctrine. Imagine a sheet of still water into which a slanting stick is being lowered with a motion vertically downward. Let 1, 2, and 3 be 3 consecutive positions of the stick. A, B, and C will be 3 connective positions of the meeting of the stick with the surface of the water. As the stick passes down, the meeting will move from A to B and C. Suppose now all the water to be removed except a film. At the meeting of the film and the stick, there will be an interruption of the film. If we suppose the film to have a property like that of a soap bubble, of closing up round any penetrating object, then as the stick goes vertically downward, the interruption in the film will move on. If we pass a spiral through the film, the intersection will give a point moving in a circle. And this is shown by the dotted line in figure 2. For the plane being, such a point moving in a circle in its plane would probably constitute a cosmical phenomena, something like the motion of an planet in orbit. Suppose now that the spiral to be still. Suppose now the spiral to be still and the film to move vertically upward. The whole spiral will be represented in the film in the consecutive positions of the point of intersection. If instead of one spiral we take a complicated construction consisting of spirals, inclined and straight lines, broken and curved lines, and if the film move vertically upward, we shall have an entire universe of moving points, the movements of which will appear to the plane being as original. The plane being will explain these movements as depending one upon another, and indeed he will never happen to think that these movements are fictitious and are dependent upon spirals and other lines lying outside of his space. Returning to the plane being and his perception of the world and analyzing his relations to the three-dimensional world, we see that for the two-dimensional or plane being, it will be very difficult to understand all the complexity of the phenomena of our world as it appears to us. He, the plane being, is accustomed to perceive the world as being too simple. Taking into consideration the sections of figures instead of the figures themselves, the plane being will compare them in relation to their length and their greater or lesser curvature, i.e., their, for him, more or less rapid motion. I.e., their, T-H-E-I-R, for him, more or less rapid motion. The differences between the objects of our world as they exist for us, he would not understand. The functions of the objects of our world would be completely mysterious to his mind, incomprehensible, supernatural. Let us imagine that a coin and a candle, the diameter of which is equal to that of the coin, are on the plane upon which two-dimensional being lives. To the plane being, they will seem two equal circles, i.e., two moving in absolutely identical lines. He will never discover any difference between them. The functions of the coin and the candle in our world, these are for him absolutely terra incognita. If we try to imagine what an enormous evolution the plane being must pass through in order to understand the function of the coin and the candle and the difference between these functions, we shall understand the nature of the division between the plane world and the world of three dimensions, and the complete impossibility of even imagining on the plane anything at all like the three-dimensional world with its manifold of function. The properties of the phenomena of the plane world will be extremely monotonous. They will differ by the order of their appearance, their duration, and their periodicity. Solids and the things of his world, of this world, will be flat and uniform, like shadows, i.e., like the shadows of quite different solids, which seem to us uniform. Even if the plane being could come in contact with our consciousness, he would never be in a position to understand all the manifoldness and richness, the phenomena of our world, and the variety of function of the things of that world. Plane beings would not be in a position to master our most ordinary concepts. It would be extremely difficult for them to understand that phenomena, identical for them, are in reality different. And on the other hand, the phenomena quite separate for them are in reality parts of one great phenomenon and even one object or one being. This last will be one of the most difficult things for the plane being to understand. If we imagine our plane being to be inhabiting a horizontal plane intersecting the top of a tree in parallel to the surface of the earth, then for such a being, each of the various sections of the branches will appear as quite separate phenomena or object. The idea of the tree and its branches will never occur to him. Generally speaking, the understanding of the most fundamental and simple things of our world will be infinitely long and difficult to the plane being. He would have to entirely reconstruct his concepts of space and time. This would be the first step. Unless it is taken, nothing is accomplished. Until the plane being shall imagine all our universe as existing in time, i.e., until he refers to time, everything lying on both sides of his plane, he will never understand anything. In order to begin to understand the third dimension, the inhabitant of the plane must conceive of his time concepts spatially. That is, translate his time into space. To achieve even the spark of a true understanding of our world, he will have to reconstruct completely all his ideas, to reevaluate all values, to revise all concepts, to dissever the uniting concepts, to unite those that are dissevered, and what is most important, to create an infinite number of new ones. If we put down the 5 fingers of one hand on the plane of the two-dimensional being, they will be for him 5 separate phenomena. Let us try to imagine what an enormous mental evolution he would have to undergo in order to understand that these 5 separate phenomena on his plane are the fingertips of the hand of a large, active, and intelligent man. To make out step by step how the plane being would attain to an understanding of our world, lying in the region of the, to him, mysterious third dimension, i.e. partly in the past, partly in the future, would be interesting in the highest degree. First of all, in order to understand the world of 3 dimensions, he must cease to be two-dimensional. He must become 3-dimensional himself. Or in other words, he must feel an interest in the life of the 3-dimensional space. After having felt the interest of this life, he will, by so doing, transcend his plane, and he will never be in a position thereafter to return to it. Entering more and more within the circle of ideas and concepts which were entirely incomprehensible to him before, he will have already become not 2-dimensional, but 3-dimensional. But all along the plane being will have been essentially 3-dimensional. That is, he will have had the 3rd dimension without being conscious of it himself. To become 3-dimensional, he must be 3-dimensional. Then, as the end of ends, he can address himself to the self-liberation from the illusion of the 2-dimensionality of himself and the world, and to the apprehension of the 3-dimensional world. And that concludes chapter 6.